pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Wow, so I spent about 7 minutes preparing to do this video because it's a page 112 tag and doesn't require a lot of preparation. And during that 7 minutes, I guess I gulped down my first glass of white wine of the evening. This is my second. But did it ever go right to my face? So I'm not embarrassed. I'm not drunk. Maybe a little tired, which is why maybe I'm so flushed. But remember, the test of whether Sean the Book Maniac is drunk or not, especially on a Sunday night tag, is if he's not making sense, he's still sober. So I'm sure this video will prove that. So it's time for another page 112 tag. I was planning to do one this weekend anyway, and was quite delighted to see that Steve Donahue beat me to it. So I'm glad this tag is kind of catching on. I'm only gonna tag one person in this video, and I'm gonna do it now in case I forget at the end. But if I remember, I'll do it at the end again, as well as in the show notes. But I have received a couple comments on my BookTube channel from Mercedes of Mercy's Bookish Musings today. So, given what Mercedes is dealing with in her reading life and her BookTube life right now, I'm just going to very gently, tentatively, in a non-pressuring way, tag her to see if doing this kind of a video might resonate with where she's at in her reading life. If not, no problem. But anybody else, please do this tag. So far, I think it's only been Steve and I, so maybe it's a Steve and Sean tag, and that's just fine too. So I'm not going to repeat the whole long spiel about the tag. I'll give you, to the degree that Sean the Book Maniac is ever capable of giving a précis or a paraphrase, I'm going to do that now. And you can look for a longer explanation in the show notes or in some of my earlier versions of this tag. But this is based on a literary prize from France, which generates a short list from a long list based on a blind evaluation of page 112 only from the novels. And that's what I'm going to do for you today. I'm going to read without giving you any information about the titles, authors, anything. Page 112 only, and give you my reaction to each page, and then you think about which of the three is the most interesting for you. Now, I've had a couple comments recently which were really great to get from people that said, well, of the 3 pages you read, the one I hated the least was number 2, or something like that. So maybe none of them are going to be a fit for you, and that's fine too, but I hope it might be an interesting exercise. I think it's as useful a method for evaluating a work of fiction as any other. Judging a book by its cover, or reading the first page, or reading the first chapter. I think this is just as good, or certainly interesting. So today I've chosen 3 novels that are not debuts, and they're by more well-known writers, because I think that's maybe more fair to group them together. I think debuts should be grouped together in books by writers that actually have a literary reputation. Makes sense. So without further ado, here is book number 1. They took me down many roads, rough-handling me in the sack. They swung me round. They changed me from one shoulder to another, and the sack kept tightening about me. I heard the noises of lorries and cars, the tumultuous sounds of a marketplace. All the time I fought and struggled like a trapped animal. The more I strained for freedom, the more they tightened the sack, till I had no room to struggle. My feet were around my head, and my neck was twisted to breaking point. I couldn't breathe, and I fought the panic that washed over me in waves. The blankness of death came upon me. I shut my eyes. It was no different when I opened them. At one point I fell into a strange sleep in which the figure of a king resplendent in gold appeared to me and vanished. My spirit companions began singing in my ears, rejoicing in my captivity and in the fact that I would soon be joining them. I could not shut out their singing, and I'm not sure which was worse, being bundled away by unknown people to an unknown destination, or hearing my spirit companions orchestrate my passage through torment with their sweet and excruciating voices. When I had fought and my energy was exhausted and I couldn't do anything, I called to our great king and I said, "I do not want to die." I had hardly finished when the figure of the king appeared to me again and dissolved into the face of the midget. By now I had ceased to hear any sounds outside, except for the rushing of waves, the hissing of water, and the keening of birds. Suddenly I remembered the penknife the midget had given me, and began another struggle to find it. I searched my pockets. I searched the sack, and couldn't find it. My fear became unbearable. Then a quietness came over me. I gave up. I accepted my destiny. Water poured into the sack. I became convinced that I was being taken to an underwater kingdom, where they say certain spirits reside. As I tried to keep the water out of my mouth, I felt something metallic, like a frozen fish, banging against my head. It was the penknife. I wasted no time in cutting my way out. The sack material was very tough, but the water had softened it a little, and it took some time to cut my way out. And when I did, the outside world was black like the bottom of a well. I fell out into the water with a splash. "The boy has escaped!" a voice cried. It was very dark. The river could have been the night, and the water was bitingly cold. I stayed under without moving. Okay, well, that is just riveting for me. What a lucky author to have that particular text on page 112, because I was seized by it from the very first sentence. Want to keep going. So this is just amazing. Even with some of the kind of primitive spirituality, visions and dreams or hallucinations or whatever, which isn't my cup of tea, I don't care. I loved everything about it. I can't think of anything negative to say. It almost reads like it could be a little mini short story. Of course, we don't know what happened, but wow, this page. I'm going to read this novel very soon, I think. All right, so now book number 2, which I have only on ebook. This one I've taken the liberty of starting from the sentence which begins on the previous page and finishing with the sentence that concludes on the next page, just to give a little more context. Without that, it was kind of really hard to figure out anything. So, book number 2. He had also climbed to a hilltop beyond the Japanese house, from which there was, to be seen, a world of bays and islands. He told Helen, "We'll do these things some day." When he went away, he knew that there was no possibility of it. If he brought her into the valley or into the far hill, he would take her in his arms. His very happiness distressed him. He wrote to Peter Exley and set a date for his Chinese journey, which would remove him, for some weeks, to a great distance. Leith arranged to travel first in northern Japan and from there to Harbin and Shanghai. He would then fly south and visit his friend in Hong Kong, from there sailing back to Kure, for he had a fancy to enter the inland sea from the west and see the islands. He expected to be away 2 months. At the compound in the hills, no one could imagine his absence, even those who wished him away. He had brought substance to that counterfeit place. Of those who loved him, Ben feared to die before his return, as did also Helen, if differently. On the morning of his farewell, Helen herself departed. There was a cultural expedition to Kyoto and Nara for dependents from Commonwealth forces. Okay, this doesn't really grab me, and this may be an unlucky fluke that what we've got here is really a lot of expository prose, which isn't nearly as inviting as the scene that we heard from book number 1. I think there might be an interesting story here, but the writing is not grabbing me at all. but I want to give this writer the benefit of the doubt because there's a few... It seems very old-fashioned, and I'll tell you right now, this book is not old. It's less than 20 years old. But the prose seems very ornate and kind of old-fashioned to me. There's a lot of commas here, but that's pretty minor. But turns of phrase that are quite kind of His very happiness distressed him. That kind of sentence just does not reverberate for me. And there's a few like that. But there's some other sentences that kind of give me a little bit of a flutter of interest. For example, no one could imagine his absence, even those who wished him away. I'm curious about what that's about. I want to know more. He had brought substance to that counterfeit place. Again, it's a little bit stylized, but what does it mean? I'm curious. Ben feared to die before his return, as did also Helen, if differently. So again, there's a lot of a dynamic between the characters that I'm curious about, but I don't really love this sentence. As did also Helen, if differently. If differently, okay, but as did also Helen. Not loving the prose here. So, those are my preliminary thoughts on book number 2. This is fun! Book number 3. I visualize him sitting between the voluptuous mother and that wise, level-eyed child. Perhaps he doesn't recognize the dangers, or maybe they have their own appeal for him. In any case, it's generally agreed Madame Piquet is very fortunate to have this suitor. A little shrug after that. It's quite plain how it was done. I see things now in a different light. In a way, I'm quite relieved to hear about it. There's a good reason why I've never been able to fulfill my longings. She's been in love with someone else the whole time. He came to visit practically every weekend. So really, I would have been unsuccessful anyway. It's comforting to realize that. And a student, well, one doesn't mind envying a student. It's much better than a jeweler, say, or the owner of a bar. Eventually I discover his name, Gerard. These calm mornings, Anne-Marie crossing the Place de Carouge. It's very small. There's a grocery, a little cafe, a fish store. She walks to work, her heels echoing on the pavement like shot, still a bit of warmth from the bed clinging to her, her flesh warm still and unwary, her mouth sullen. Dean is still asleep. His clothes are strewn about. The shutters are closed. He never dreams. He's like a dead musician, like a spent runner. He hasn't the strength to dream, or rather, his dreams take place while he is awake, and they are marvelous for at least one quality. He has the power to prolong them. Duration is everything. One knows that instinctively. It hangs over the two of them like an unpronounced sentence. It lies in their bed. All of Anne-Marie's joy proceeds from the hope that they are only beginning, that before them is marriage and farewell to Autun. While, like the negative from which her dreams are printed, he perceives the opposite. Okay, well, I like a lot of things about that. Again, it seems it's very stylized in kind of an old-fashioned, formal way. And it's not an old book, but it's a little bit older than the others. A few decades older. The story is not particularly interesting, but again, how much can we judge a book by what we find on one page? Maybe this is a slightly dull moment in an absolutely riveting novel, but the first romantic plot is about he loves a woman who loves somebody else, and he's relieved that it's only a student. Those are emotional reactions that most of us can relate to, but doesn't really grab me as a part of a story. But the second half does grab me quite a bit. I like the erotic, sexual energy of the description. Her flesh is warm, and her flesh warm, still, and unwary. Dean is still asleep. His clothes are strewn about. That kind of hums in me. And then the concluding thing about, we're talking about who? Anne-Marie and Dean. I don't know who they are, but I do like the concluding thing. All of Anne-Marie's joy proceeds from the hope that they are only beginning, that before them is marriage and farewell to Autun. Well, like the negative from which her dreams are printed, he perceives the opposite. I love that sentence. I think that's beautiful. So I'm intrigued with reservations. So that's book number 3. So I think you can probably already guess which one I'm picking, and definitely book number 1 is the one that sparks my curiosity and my appreciation for some beautiful writing. I love the writing, and the story is very dramatic. So that would be my first pick. My second pick would be book number 3, because there was enough really interesting writing that even if I found that it was a rather conventional hetero-nonsense, to quote Matthew Sharapa, even if it was a rather conventional romantic novel, the way that some of it is being told to me, I think I would like to check it out. And even though I didn't hate book number 2, it would be my third choice. And again, it may just be an unlucky fluke that there was just really a section of expository prose that, even with the fact that this story seems to be at least temporarily situated in Japan, and probably during maybe post-World War II or something, didn't really grab me. So, what did you think? Maybe you didn't like any of them, or maybe they all tied for first place with you, but I'm always curious for you to indicate in the comments your reaction, especially when you don't agree with me, but if you do, that's fine too. So it's now time for the drum roll. The first book is The Famished Road by Ben Okri, and this one won the Booker Prize. Now, actually, did it, or did he win the Booker Prize? I don't actually know that. Yeah, this one won the Booker Prize in 1991, and he's yet another Nigerian author. My God, there's as many amazing writers in Nigeria as there are in the UK or Canada. I can't wait to read this one. This one's, because of page 112, this one's going very near the top of my pile. And book number 2 is the 2003 novel. I believe it's out of America. I don't know where she's from. It's called The Great Fire. Oh, there's nothing to hold up, just my paper. I'll put the book image. The Great Fire by Shirley Hazard. I don't know anything about her. I believe she might be a late bloomer writer, which I'm very attracted to. Writers that start their literary careers late in life, and I think she might be one of those, but that's all I know. If that's true, that's all I know. And book number 3 is from 1967, A Sport and a Pastime by James Salter. And he was an American writer, right? But I think he maybe lived in... Yeah, born in New Jersey in 1926. I don't know if he lived in France or not. I think he passed away in the last decade, perhaps. And I'm curious about this one too. So, my first pick, the Nigerian writer. Second pick, the American. And third pick, I don't know where she's from. But I probably will eventually give all of these a try. So, I'm curious about your reactions, and if you would like to do this tag, I have specifically tagged Mercedes of Mercy's Bookish Musings, but anybody else who would like to try it, please do so. And thanks for watching.